I fell asleep on the last electric train out of the city with my backpack wrapped around one arm and my headphones still playing music I wasn't even listening to anymore. It had been one of those exhausting days that leaves your brain buzzing long after your body gives up. My shift at the bookstore ran late. My manager dumped inventory on me 30 minutes before closing, and by the time I made it onto the train, I was running purely on caffeine and irritation. The carriage was almost empty. Just a couple sitting near the far doors, an older man asleep with his mouth open, and some guy in a dark hoodie staring out the window like he was in an indie movie about emotional damage. I remember noticing him because he looked weirdly calm. Not intimidating, not sketchy, just still. Most people on late-night trains either scroll endlessly, blast videos without headphones, or look like they're one inconvenience away from fighting someone. But this guy sat quietly by the window with one hand tucked into the sleeve of his hoodie, watching the dark blur outside. I probably stared too long, because his eyes flicked toward me suddenly. I looked away immediately. Smooth, Parker. Real smooth. I sat across the aisle from him, dropped my bag between my feet, and promised myself I'd stay awake long enough not to miss my stop. That promise lasted maybe 12 minutes. The next thing I remember was warmth. Not normal train warmth. Not the stale, overheated air inside the carriage. Something softer. My eyes opened slowly, my brain lagging behind reality for a few painful seconds. I was lying against someone. No worse. My head was literally on somebody's shoulder. I jerked upright so fast I almost slammed into the window. "Oh my God," I blurted. The guy from before looked over calmly, like this happened to him every day. "You're awake," he said. His voice was low, rough around the edges in a way that immediately made me more awake, not less. I stared at him in horror. Was I? You fell asleep. I can see that. You were about 2 seconds away from falling into the aisle, he added. So I moved you back. That explained the warmth. And the jacket draped over me. I froze. Is this yours? Yeah. You put your jacket on me? You were freezing. I blinked at him. Who says things like that to strangers? I pulled the jacket off carefully and handed it back. Sorry. I didn't mean to invade your personal space unconscious. One side of his mouth lifted slightly. You looked committed to it. I should have laughed. Instead, I noticed something else. The train was stopped. Completely stopped. And empty. Every seat around us was abandoned. Cold panic hit instantly. What stop is this? The guy glanced outside casually. End of the line. My stomach dropped. No, my stop was 3 stations ago. I know. You knew? You were asleep. That's not helpful. Now he actually smiled a little. Not smug. Amused. You were impossible to wake up, he said. I tried twice. I stared at him suspiciously. You tried. You smacked my arm and told me to let you die peacefully. Heat crawled up my neck immediately. I did not. You absolutely did. I covered my face with one hand. This is horrible. It was kind of funny. I peeked at him through my fingers. He looked different up close than he had across the aisle earlier. Broader shoulders. Dark hair that curled slightly near the ends. Tired eyes, but soft ones. Pretty eyes, actually. Not that I noticed immediately. Obviously. I'm Parker. I muttered finally, mostly because it felt weird to continue embarrassing myself anonymously. Griffin. Of course his name was Griffin. That was the most mysteriously attractive stranger name I'd ever heard in my life. The train doors hissed open somewhere farther down the carriage. I stood quickly, adjusting my backpack. Right. Well, thanks for not letting me crack my skull open on public transportation. You're welcome. I took 2 steps toward the exit before stopping. Because outside the windows? Rain. Not normal rain either. Violent rain. The kind that turns streets silver and makes even 5 minutes outside feel personal. Great, I sighed. Griffin stood slowly beside me, pulling his hoodie back on. You don't have an umbrella, he observed. You say that like you do. He held one up silently from beside the seat. I narrowed my eyes. This whole night feels unfairly in your favor. That earned a quiet laugh. For some reason, hearing him laugh made my chest feel weirdly light. Dangerous. We stepped off the train together onto the nearly empty platform. The station lights reflected off soaked concrete, everything glowing pale yellow against the dark. I immediately shivered. Griffin noticed. Again, that was the first strange thing about him. He noticed everything. Not in a creepy way. Not intense. Just attentive. Like he couldn't help it. You live far? He asked as we walked toward the station exit. About 20 minutes from my stop. You missed your stop by 3 stations. Yes, Griffin. Thank you. I'm aware my night is collapsing. There's a night bus. I looked at him hopefully. Still running. No idea. You really build optimism and destroy it instantly, huh? Another tiny smile. Outside, the rain sounded louder than the city itself. Griffin opened the umbrella before I could even ask, holding it above both of us automatically. We stood there awkwardly close under the small space of it while cold wind pushed rain sideways across the sidewalk. I became painfully aware of everything. His shoulder brushing mine. The smell of rain on his hoodie. The fact that he was taller than me by enough to be annoying. This is probably how horror movies start, I said. You think I'm murdering you? No, but if you did, people would definitely say the warning signs were there. You got on a train alone at midnight. Okay, wow. Victim blaming already. He laughed again, quieter this time. And that was somehow worse. Because Griffin's smiling felt rare enough that every single one landed directly in my nervous system. We reached the bus stop only to find the digital sign flashing. Out of service. I stared at it in silence. Then at the rain. Then at Griffin. Well, I announced, this is officially the universe testing me personally. Griffin shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets, thinking for a second. You can wait at the cafe near the river until the morning trains start again. There's a cafe open right now? 24 hours. I looked at him suspiciously. You sound like you've done this before. I miss stops sometimes too. Somehow that made him feel suddenly less untouchable. Less mysterious stranger. More real person. Okay, I said carefully. Lead the way, train guardian. He looked at me. Train guardian? You wrapped me in a jacket and protected my unconscious body from public transportation. That's your title now. I hate it. You accepted it very fast. And for the first time since waking up beside him, Griffin looked fully amused. It changed his whole face. I realized immediately that noticing that was probably a problem. The cafe looked like the kind of place that only existed between midnight and sunrise. Dim yellow lights. Fogged up windows. 3 exhausted university students sharing fries in the corner. A barista who looked spiritually disconnected from reality. The second we stepped inside, warmth hit me so hard I almost groaned. Oh, thank God, I muttered. Griffin shook rainwater from his hoodie sleeves while I awkwardly tried to flatten my completely ruined hair using the reflection in the window. Your hair's doing something aggressive, Griffin said calmly. I turned toward him slowly. You know, for a stranger, you're getting very comfortable insulting me. I'm observing. That's worse. His mouth twitched again. I was beginning to realize Griffin smiled like someone who wasn't used to doing it often. Every time it happened, it looked slightly accidental. We ordered coffee mostly because it felt illegal not to at 2 in the morning. I fully intended to pay for mine until Griffin quietly handed his card over first. Oh, absolutely not, I said immediately. It's coffee, Parker. That's exactly how manipulation starts. You think I'm buying your loyalty with caffeine? It's working a little. That actually got a soft laugh out of him. The barista handed us our drinks, clearly assuming we were together in the deeply exhausted way nighttime workers always assume things. I noticed it immediately when she said, you guys can sit near the heater if you want. You guys, not separate. Something about that made heat creep into my face for no reason at all. Griffin didn't react, at least not visibly. We sat by the window while rain hammered against the glass outside. Up close, the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. Just quiet. Comfortable quiet. Which honestly felt suspicious considering I'd met him less than an hour ago unconscious on public transportation. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. So what's your deal? Griffin looked over. My deal. You have mysterious train energy. That's not a real thing. It absolutely is. You sit like someone in an indie film whose tragic backstory gets revealed halfway through. I think you talk too much when you're tired. That's fair. He glanced out the window again. I studied him carefully while pretending not to. There were tiny shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept properly in a while. His hands were rough, knuckles slightly scraped up like he worked with them somehow. Not office job hands. Real hands. You work nights? I asked. Sometimes. That sounded intentionally vague. I drive deliveries. See? That's normal. You could have just said that. Griffin shrugged slightly. Didn't think it mattered. Something about the way he said things fascinated me. Like every sentence got filtered through 3 layers before he let it out. Meanwhile, I'd apparently decided to reveal my entire personality to a stranger over coffee. So you just ride trains after work rescuing exhausted bookstore employees? You mentioned the bookstore exactly once. I'm memorable. You're loud. Rude. His eyes flicked toward mine again. There it was. That tiny almost smile. I hated how much I wanted to keep earning those. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the river. The cafe lights flickered once. I glanced toward the windows. Please tell me that's not foreshadowing. You always narrate your life like this? Yes. You must be exhausting to yourself. You have no idea. For a second, Griffin just looked at me. Not staring. Not intense. Just attentive again. And suddenly, I became hyper-aware of the fact that it was nearly 3 in the morning and I was sitting across from an attractive stranger who had wrapped me in his jacket like I was some abandoned Victorian child. Dangerous. Very dangerous. So, I said quickly, why were you on the train? He leaned back slightly in his chair. Couldn't sleep. Simple answer. Too simple. You take trains when you can't sleep? Sometimes. That feels emotionally concerning. His fingers tapped once against his coffee cup. My apartment gets loud. There it was again. That feeling that every answer from Griffin had something unfinished attached to it. I didn't push, mostly because I understood it. Some nights exhaustion isn't enough to quiet your brain. Sometimes movement feels easier than being alone with your thoughts. I knew that feeling better than I liked admitting. My roommate plays drums, I offered. Badly. Maybe you should trade apartments with him. You have a roommate? Unfortunately. You don't like him? I like him less every time he microwaves fish. That finally got a real laugh out of Griffin. Low, warm, brief, but real. And God, that was unfair. I smiled before I could stop myself. He noticed that too. Of course he did. Griffin noticed everything. The silence stretched again after that, softer this time. Then his phone buzzed against the table. I watched something shift immediately in his expression. Not dramatic, just smaller. His eyes dropped to the screen, jaw tightening slightly. You okay? I asked without thinking. He locked the phone instantly. Yeah. Lie. Not a huge lie. Not catastrophic. But definitely not true. And for some reason, seeing that crack in his calmness made something twist quietly in my chest. You don't have to tell me, I said. He looked mildly surprised by that. I know. Another pause. Then, quieter this time. Thanks. The rain outside somehow got even worse. The streets were almost empty now, headlights smearing across wet pavement beyond the windows. The whole city felt suspended in that strange hour where everything becomes softer and sadder at the same time. I should have been uncomfortable. Instead, sitting there with Griffin felt weirdly easy. Like we'd skipped some invisible step most strangers have to go through first. You know what's bothering me? I said eventually. What? You were absolutely prepared to let me sleep on your shoulder indefinitely. You look tired. That's not an answer. Griffin took a sip of coffee calmly. You also look like you'd fall over if I moved. Still weirdly caring. I'm starting to regret helping you. No, you're not. His eyes lifted toward mine again. No, he admitted quietly. And something about the way he said it made my heartbeat stumble a little. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just enough to annoy me. The cafe clock ticked past 3:30. Outside, rain still crashed endlessly against the glass. And somewhere between missing my stop and waking up beside Griffin, I developed the very real suspicion that my life had just become complicated. By 4 in the morning, the cafe had become strangely intimate. Not romantic intimate. Not yet. Just the kind of quiet closeness that only exists when the rest of the world is asleep and two people accidentally end up suspended outside normal life together. One of the students in the corner left. The barista disappeared into the back room. Rain kept hitting the windows hard enough to sound almost hypnotic. And Griffin still hadn't left. Neither had I. You know, I said, stirring melted sugar into my third coffee like it had personally offended me. Most people would have escaped this conversation hours ago. You say that like I'm being held hostage. Aren't you? I think you'd be worse at kidnapping than you imagine. I pointed at him immediately. See? That. You keep saying funny things unexpectedly and throwing me off balance. Griffin leaned back slightly in his chair, arms folded loosely now. More relaxed than before. You recover fast. I have to. My personality depends on momentum. Another tiny smile. God. This was becoming a problem. My phone buzzed suddenly against the table, making me jump slightly. Roommate. You alive? I snorted. What? Griffin asked. My roommate just discovered I never came home. You should probably answer him. I'm considering faking my death for character development. That feels extreme. You don't know him. I typed quickly. Me. Missed my stop. Trapped in rain. Survived narrowly. 3 dots appeared instantly. Roommate. Why do your texts always sound like a divorced father? I stared at the screen. You know what? That's hurtful. Griffin actually laughed softly into his coffee this time. Not polite amusement. Real amusement. And for one dangerous second, I forgot how tired I was. Forgot the rain. Forgot the hour. It was just him smiling across from me under dim cafe lights, which felt intimate in a way I absolutely did not need. You do look like you send long emotional messages at 2 a.m., he said. I have layers. You have paragraphs. That too. My phone buzzed again. Roommate. You drunk? Me. Emotionally, maybe. Griffin shook his head slightly, like he couldn't decide whether I was ridiculous or concerning. Probably both. Outside, thunder cracked somewhere nearby. The lights flickered again, then completely died. The cafe dropped into darkness. Oh, absolutely not, I muttered immediately. A second later, emergency lights kicked on near the counter, dim and yellow, and somehow even more dramatic than before. The barista yelled weakly from the back. Power outage. Coffee machine's dead. No, I whispered. We've lost too much tonight already. Griffin looked genuinely entertained now. You're taking this hard. I'm surviving exclusively through caffeine and personality. Dangerous combination. Rain hammered harder outside. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the cafe, softening everything. Griffin's face looked different in the low gold light. Sharper somehow. More tired too. I noticed him glance toward the windows again. Toward the street. Toward nothing, really. You okay? I asked quietly. That brought his attention back to me immediately. Yeah. Another lie. Smaller this time. But there. I leaned back in my chair slightly. You know, you don't actually seem like someone who rides trains because he can't sleep. Griffin was quiet for a second. Then, what do I seem like? The question caught me off guard. I studied him carefully before answering. Like somebody trying not to go home yet. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that I knew I'd hit something real. The cafe suddenly felt much quieter. I talk too much, I said quickly. No, Griffin said softly. You notice things. Something about hearing that from him made warmth spread low in my chest. Because Griffin didn't seem like someone who handed out compliments casually. He looked down at his coffee for a second before speaking again. My younger sister lives with me, he said finally. She works early mornings. If I'm awake all night moving around the apartment, I wake her up. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. She's 19, he added. College. You take night trains so she can sleep? Griffin shrugged slightly like that wasn't a completely insane level of consideration. She has exams. I stared at him. You're actually ridiculous. His eyebrows lifted faintly. Why? Because normal strangers don't quietly sacrifice sleep for family members while looking like emotionally unavailable train cryptids. That earned another laugh. Short. Warm. And there it was again. That feeling. Like every tiny genuine reaction from him mattered more than it should. I rested my chin against my hand, studying him openly now. You know what your problem is? That question feels dangerous. You act intimidating at first. I'm literally sitting here drinking coffee. You have mysterious, exhausted eyes. That's not intimidation. It is to me. Griffin shook his head slightly, looking down for a second. Then, quieter. You weren't scared of me. The way he said it made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Not joking. Not fishing for reassurance. Just noticing. I mean, I said carefully. I probably should have been more concerned when I woke up on a stranger. That's fair. But you don't feel dangerous. His eyes flicked toward mine again. The silence after that felt heavier somehow. Outside, rainwater streamed endlessly down the windows. The emergency lights buzzed softly overhead. And suddenly I became very aware of how close we were sitting. How long we'd been here. How easy it had become to exist around him. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Then Griffin's phone buzzed again. This time I saw the screen light up before he turned it over. MOM. His jaw tightened immediately. And without thinking, I asked softly, You don't want to answer? He was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, Not tonight. The way he said it made something ache quietly inside me. Like there was a whole storm sitting underneath his calmness that he spent every day holding back with both hands. And for reasons I absolutely could not explain at 4 in the morning beside a stranger. I wanted to know him anyway. Around 5 in the morning, the rain finally started easing. Not stopping completely, just softening enough that the city outside no longer looked like it was actively drowning. The cafe lights flickered back on suddenly, bright enough to make both of us squint. The barista reappeared from the back room, looking emotionally devastated. "Coffee machine lives," she announced weakly. "Nature is healing," I whispered. Griffin looked down briefly, smiling into his sleeve again. I was becoming addicted to making him laugh, which felt unhealthy considering I'd known him for approximately one train-related crisis. The cafe slowly started waking up around us. Early commuters wandered in looking half dead. Someone in business clothes ordered 6 coffees like a man carrying responsibilities too heavy for one soul. Reality was returning. I didn't like it, because reality meant eventually leaving. And something about that suddenly bothered me more than it should have. Griffin checked the time on his phone before looking toward the windows. Morning trains should start again soon. There it was. The end of whatever this weird suspended night had been. "Right?" I said, trying to sound normal about it. He noticed immediately. Of course he did. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. Griffin tilted his head slightly like he knew I was doing exactly what he'd been doing all night. Then his phone buzzed again. This time he stared at the screen longer before locking it. "You should answer eventually," I said quietly. His jaw shifted slightly. "I know." But he still didn't. Something about that made me weirdly sad. Not because I knew him well enough to understand it. I didn't. But because sometimes you can recognize exhaustion in another person even without context. And Griffin looked tired in a way sleep probably couldn't fix. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong," I said carefully. "But whatever it is, I hope it gets lighter." The words slipped out before I could stop them. For a second, Griffin just looked at me. Really looked. Like nobody had said something gentle to him in a while. "Parker," he said quietly. I immediately panicked internally, because the way he said my name felt unfairly soft. "What?" I asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. A tiny pause. Then, "You're strange." I stared at him. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. His laugh came easier now, less guarded. And God, that was dangerous. We stayed another 20 minutes after that, mostly talking about stupid things. Movies we hated. Terrible customers. The fact that Griffin had apparently never watched a single reality dating show in his life. "You're missing psychological warfare as entertainment," I informed him seriously. "I think I'll survive." "You say that now." The sun still hadn't fully risen by the time we finally stepped outside. The city looked washed out and silver after the storm, streets still glittering with rainwater under pale early morning light. Cold air hit immediately. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets automatically before realizing. Not my jacket. Griffin's. I froze mid-step. He noticed instantly. "You still have it. You gave it to me." I didn't say keep it forever. I looked down at the dark hoodie hanging loose around me. "Okay, this is embarrassing because I genuinely forgot I stole this." "You looked comfortable." Something about the way he said that made my stomach flip annoyingly. I pulled the jacket off carefully and handed it back. Our fingers brushed for maybe half a second. That was all it took. Both of us noticed. The silence afterward felt suddenly too aware. Dangerous. Very dangerous. The station platform was nearly empty now, trains humming softly somewhere in the distance. I adjusted my backpack awkwardly. Well, this feels like the part where mysterious train strangers disappear dramatically. "You watch too many movies. You encourage me emotionally." "That's not true. You wrap me in outerwear, Griffin." His eyes dropped briefly like he didn't know what to do with that. Then, "You looked cold." There it was again. That impossible quiet tenderness hidden underneath everything about him. No performance. No flirting. No trying to impress me. Just instinctive care, which somehow felt more intimate than if he'd tried. A train rolled slowly into the station behind us. Mine. I suddenly didn't want to get on it. Which was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I'd known this man for one sleepless rainstorm and 3 coffees. Still, "You'll miss your stop again if you keep staring at the train like that," Griffin said softly. I looked at him. He looked tired, warm, guarded, real. And before I could overthink it, I heard myself ask, "Do you always disappear after emotionally significant public transportation encounters?" One eyebrow lifted slightly. Emotionally significant. You know what I mean. A tiny smile appeared again, then faded just as quickly. I don't usually talk to people on trains. The honesty in that hit me harder than it should have. "Me neither," I admitted. Another pause. Then Griffin reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it toward me. Put your number in. My brain fully stopped functioning for one entire second. Oh, I said intelligently. His expression softened just slightly at my reaction. You don't have to sound so surprised. No, I'm just trying to act normal about this and failing badly. You've been failing badly since you woke up on me. That's fair. I took the phone anyway. My hands were weirdly unsteady typing my number in, which was deeply humiliating. I handed the phone back carefully. There, I said. Now you can contact me whenever you need someone to insult your train habits. Griffin looked down at the screen for a second before locking it again. Then quietly, okay, why did that single word sound like it mattered? The train doors slid open beside us. People started stepping on. I should move. Immediately. Instead, I stood there looking at him while cold morning wine blew rainwater across the platform. Parker, Griffin said suddenly. Yeah. A beat of silence. Then, get home safe this time. And something about the way he said it. Soft, tired, careful. Made my chest ache unexpectedly. I smiled before I could stop myself. You too, train guardian. He shook his head immediately. I still hate that. Doesn't matter. It's permanent now. For the first time all night, Griffin smiled fully. Not restrained. Not accidental. Real enough to make my heart stutter painfully in my chest. Then the train doors beeped behind me. Reality returning again. I stepped backward toward the entrance slowly. And Griffin, strange, careful, quietly kind Griffin, watched until I got on the train. I slept for almost 12 hours after getting home. Not because I meant to. My body just completely gave up the second my head hit the pillow. The weird part was that when I woke up sometime after noon, my first thought wasn't about work, or the rain, or the fact that my roommate had apparently sent me 7 increasingly dramatic messages overnight. It was Griffin, specifically, his laugh in the cafe, the way he noticed everything, the way he'd looked at me before I got on the train, which was honestly annoying, because I did not develop emotional attachment responsibly. I developed it like a raccoon finding shiny garbage. My phone buzzed against the mattress beside me. Roommate. Alive? Roommate. If you died after sending, emotionally maybe, I'm gonna be pissed. Roommate. Also someone ate my yogurt, and I'm blaming your ghost. I snorted into my pillow. Me. Survived. Long story. Roommate. Did you date a murderer? Me. Not technically. 3 dots appeared immediately. Roommate. What does that mean? I ignored him completely and rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. For one horrifying second, my heart fully stopped. I opened the message immediately. Griffin. Made it home. That was it. No dramatic opener. No weird flirting. Just made it home. And somehow that felt more dangerous. Because it sounded exactly like him. Quiet concern. Simple. Real. I stared at the message way too long before answering. Me. Yes. No trains were harmed in the process. The reply came almost instantly. Griffin, that's impressive for you. I smiled before I could stop myself, which was deeply embarrassing considering this man had spoken maybe 4 total jokes in his life, and I was already reacting like a fool. Me. You text like someone who owns exactly 1 black hoodie. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Griffin. I own 2. I actually laughed out loud. Great. Fantastic. I was doomed. The next few days should have reset everything. Normal life returned fast. Work. Customers asking stupid questions. My roommate destroying the kitchen emotionally every evening. The city moving normally again like nothing significant had happened. But Griffin stayed in my head anyway. Not constantly. Not obsessively. Just there. Like my brain had quietly carved out space for him without permission. We texted more than I expected after that first morning. Not nonstop. Not intense. Just small things. Griffin would send. Train delayed again. And somehow I'd stare at it for 30 seconds, smiling like an idiot. I'd send. Customer asked if books come in audio form today. And 20 minutes later. Griffin, you should have lied to him. That was the strange thing about him. In person, Griffin spoke carefully. Like words cost something. But over text, tiny glimpses of humor kept slipping through. Dry, quiet, dangerously effective. 3 nights after the cafe, I was reorganizing shelves at work when my phone buzzed again. Griffin, you working? I looked down immediately. Me. Unfortunately. Griffin, you sound devastated. Me. Someone asked me where the blue books section is. A pause. Then, Griffin, Reasonable reaction, honestly. I smiled helplessly at my screen. Okay, my coworker Mia said immediately from across the aisle. Who is he? I almost dropped the phone. What? That face. I don't have a face. You absolutely do. She pointed at me accusingly. That is texting a man face. I felt heat crawl straight into my neck. There is no man. Parker, there is a medium amount of man. Mia gasped dramatically. Oh my God. I regretted speaking instantly. Who is he? Where'd you meet? Does he have friends? Is he weird? Yes, I answered automatically. To which part? All of it. That only made her more excited. I escaped to the back room under the excuse of inventory before she could interrogate me further. Then immediately checked my phone again like a loser. Me. Apparently I make texting a man facial expressions now, so thanks for ruining my professional image. Several minutes passed before Griffin answered. Griffin, what does that even look like? Me. Humiliating apparently. Another pause. Then, Griffin, probably looks nice. I stared at the screen. Read it again. Then a third time because surely I'd hallucinated it. Probably looks nice. My entire nervous system short-circuited instantly. Parker. I nearly launched my phone into a bookshelf. Mia stood in the doorway grinning like a demon. Oh, he's bad for you, she announced immediately. You know nothing about him. You're smiling at drywall. I'm having a private moment. She pointed at me again. That's exactly what people in romantic comedies say before ruining their own lives. Unfortunately, she was making excellent points. That night, Griffin texted me first again. Griffin, you get home safe this time? There it was. That same quiet concern from the station. Something warm settled low in my chest before I could stop it. Me. Yes, train guardian. Several seconds passed. Griffin. Still hate that name. Me. It's permanent now, sorry. A minute later, another message appeared. Griffin. You busy tomorrow? I sat up straighter immediately. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Me. Depends. Are you inviting me into another emotionally significant weather event? This time his reply took longer. Then finally, Griffin, coffee maybe. Without the apocalypse this time. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it genuinely annoyed me. Because it wasn't even a dramatic message. Coffee maybe. And somehow I already knew I was going to say yes. I spent an unreasonable amount of time deciding what to wear for coffee. Which was stupid. It was coffee, not a wedding, not a date. Probably not a date. That last thought followed me around my apartment like a threat while I changed shirts 4 separate times. My roommate watched the entire process from the couch with the exhausted expression of a man witnessing psychological collapse in real time. You've worn that black sweater twice already, he informed me. It's reliable. You look like you're about to read sad poetry near a lighthouse. That's the vibe. You're meeting train guy, aren't you? I froze mid-sleeve adjustment. I hate that you call him train guy. You literally met him unconscious on public transportation. That's his title. Fair. Unfortunately. I'm just getting coffee, I muttered. My roommate stared at me for a long second. Parker. What? You reorganized your hair 3 times walking past the microwave. I pointed at him defensively. You're making this environment hostile. He grinned immediately. Oh my God, you like him. That feels dramatic. You look nervous. I always look nervous. That's true, actually. I hated that he was right. Because nervous wasn't exactly the word. It was more like aware. Aware of the fact that Griffin had somehow gotten under my skin in less than a week. Aware that every text from him made my day noticeably better. Aware that I still remembered exactly how his voice sounded saying my name in the cafe. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. The coffee shop Griffin picked was smaller than the cafe near the river. Warmer too. Plants near the windows. Soft music. The kind of place where people definitely journaled about emotional trauma voluntarily. I spotted Griffin immediately anyway. Of course I did. He was sitting near the back wall in a dark hoodie again, one hand around a coffee cup, watching the rain outside the windows. Not storm rain this time. Just soft evening drizzle. When he noticed me walking in, something in his expression shifted instantly. Subtle, but there. And for reasons I absolutely hated, my heartbeat reacted immediately. You came, I said before my brain could produce anything cooler. Excellent start. Griffin looked up at me calmly. You sound surprised. I expected you to disappear mysteriously into the night after our train encounter. That would have been dramatic. You encourage drama by existing quietly. That tiny almost smile appeared again. God, I sat across from him before my legs could forget how chairs worked. For a second, neither of us spoke. And weirdly, it wasn't awkward, just aware. You look more awake than last time, Griffin said finally. That's because I haven't collapsed unconscious onto strangers today. Good progress. I'm growing. His eyes lingered on me for a second longer than necessary before dropping toward his coffee again. And suddenly, I became hyper-aware of everything. The soft music, the rain outside, the fact that Griffin had asked me here. Very dangerous. So, I said carefully, is this where you reveal you're secretly terrible and ruin the mysterious train chemistry? I think I already ruined it by owning two identical hoodies. That actually made it worse. His laugh came easier now, less restrained every time, and I realized something slowly over the next hour. Griffin wasn't quiet because he lacked warmth. He was quiet because he listened first. Really listened. Most people waited for their turn to talk. Griffin paid attention like your words mattered before he answered them, which was honestly unfairly attractive. At one point, I caught him looking at me while I was rambling about a customer who tried organizing books by emotional color. What? I asked immediately. You move your hands a lot when you're annoyed. I looked down at myself. Wow, that's upsettingly observant. You didn't notice? No, Griffin, I don't monitor my own gestures like a stressed-out lizard. Another smile. Warm this time. God, do you always notice things like that? I asked quietly. He shrugged slightly. Depends on the person. The answer settled somewhere deep in my chest before I could stop it. Outside, rain slid slowly down the cafe windows. People moved around us softly, blurred by warm light and evening noise. And somewhere in the middle of talking about absolutely nothing important, I realized something terrifying. I felt calm around him. Not nervous calm. Not trying to impress someone calm. Real calm. Like my brain stopped running in circles for a while whenever Griffin looked at me, which honestly felt more intimate than flirting. Then his phone buzzed against the table. I watched his expression tighten immediately. Again, that same small withdrawal, like part of him stepping backward internally. He flipped the phone over without answering. I looked down at my coffee. You don't have to tell me, I said quietly. Griffin was silent for a moment. Then, it's my mom. There it was again. Not the answer itself. The weight attached to it. You don't sound excited to hear from her. A humorless breath left him. Almost a laugh. She worries. That doesn't sound terrible. She worries loudly. I smiled faintly. Emotional warfare. You have no idea. He rubbed tiredly at the back of his neck before looking back toward the window. My dad left a few years ago, he said quietly. After that, it's just been me, my mom, and my sister. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't care. Because Griffin sounded like someone used to saying things out loud. My mom, he paused carefully, doesn't really know how to stop leaning on people once she starts. Something in my chest ached quietly hearing that. Because suddenly a lot about him made sense. The exhaustion, the night trains, the carefulness. Griffin looked like someone carrying too much weight without complaining about it. You take care of everybody, I said softly before I could stop myself. His eyes lifted toward mine immediately. And for one long second, neither of us moved. Then quietly, someone has to. The way he said it hurt a little to hear. Not dramatic pain, just quiet sadness. And before I could overthink it, I heard myself ask, who takes care of you? Griffin froze. Actually froze. Like nobody had asked him that before. The cafe noise blurred softly around us while he just looked at me. Then finally, very quietly, nobody usually. Something twisted painfully in my chest. Because he didn't sound bitter saying it. Just honest. And suddenly all I wanted, irrationally, dangerously, was to make this exhausted, careful stranger feel less alone somehow. After that conversation, something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that I started noticing Griffin differently. Or maybe more honestly. Before, he'd felt like this strange, careful person I accidentally collided with during a storm. Now, I could see the exhaustion underneath him. The way he checked his phone and immediately braced himself before reading messages. The way he apologized automatically for things that weren't his fault. The fact that every time he talked about his family, it sounded less like a complaint and more like responsibility stitched directly into his bones. And the worst part? The more I learned about him, the more impossible it became not to care. Dangerous. Catastrophic, honestly. We left the cafe together around sunset. The rain had stopped completely by then, leaving the streets damp and glowing gold under city lights. Cars hissed softly across wet pavement while cold evening air slipped through the buildings. For a while we walked without talking. Not awkward silence. Just tired quiet. I shoved my hands into my pockets. You know what's unfair? What? You seem like someone who never asks anyone for anything. Griffin glanced at me sideways. That's a weird accusation. It's true, though. You barely know me. That's never stopped me before. A tiny smile appeared again, then faded slowly. My mom used to work nights when I was younger, he said after a while. So I got used to handling things. I looked over at him carefully. How young? 12, maybe. Something inside me immediately recoiled. 12-year-olds shouldn't be handling things. Griffin shrugged like that was just how life worked. I had a sister to look after. The casualness of it somehow made it worse. We stopped at a crosswalk while headlights washed silver across the wet road. You know, I said quietly, you're allowed to be tired. His eyes flicked toward me instantly. I know. No, I mean really tired. Not just physically. The light changed. People started crossing around us. But Griffin stayed standing still for half a second longer than everyone else. Like the words caught him somewhere unprotected. Then finally he started walking again. You always talk to people like this? He asked softly. Like what? Like you're trying to look directly through them. I laughed weakly. That sounds horrifying. It's intense. Sorry. I didn't say stop. The sentence landed so suddenly and so gently that my entire brain short-circuited for a second. Griffin kept walking like he hadn't just fundamentally altered my nervous system. I stared at the side of his face. You can't say things like that casually. That sounded casual to me. That's because you're emotionally dangerous. His laugh slipped out quietly again. And there it was. That warm ache low in my chest every time I made him smile. We ended up near the river without really planning to. The city looked softer at night from there. Water reflecting lights. Wind carrying distant traffic and voices across the sidewalks. Griffin leaned against the railing beside me, shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time all evening. You come here a lot? I asked. Sometimes after work. To think dramatically? To be quiet. Fair. I looked out over the water beside him. Then, you spend a lot of time alone, don't you? Griffin was quiet. Usually. The answer shouldn't have affected me as much as it did. But suddenly I could picture it too easily. Griffin sitting alone on late-night trains. Walking around the city instead of going home. Carrying everyone else's emotions while quietly disappearing inside his own. Something about that made my chest ache. You shouldn't have to do everything yourself, I said before I could stop myself. The wind moved softly through Griffin's dark hair. For a second, he didn't answer. Then finally, you barely know me, Parker. I know. And you still care? The question came out quieter than anything he'd said all night. Almost careful, like he genuinely didn't understand it. I turned toward him fully then. Streetlights reflected softly in the river behind him while cold wind pushed between us. And suddenly this didn't feel casual anymore. Not coffee. Not train conversations. Not accidental chemistry. Something real sat underneath all of it now. I think, I said slowly. You got used to believing people only notice you when they need something. Griffin looked at me like I'd stepped too close to something fragile. You notice everybody else constantly, I continued softly. But nobody notices when you're exhausted. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then Griffin looked away sharply toward the river, jaw tightening once. And for one alarming second, I thought he might actually be emotional. Not dramatic. Not crying. Just affected. Which somehow felt more intimate. Parker, he said quietly. I stepped closer without thinking. What? He looked back at me then. Tired eyes. Guarded expression. That impossible softness he kept hidden underneath everything. You make it hard to stay distant from you. My heartbeat slammed painfully against my ribs. The city noise disappeared completely for a second. All I could hear was wind and blood rushing in my ears. Dangerous. So unbelievably dangerous. Neither of us moved. Griffin's eyes stayed fixed on mine like he was waiting for something. Or maybe trying to stop himself from something. And suddenly, I became hyper-aware of how close we were standing near the river in the cold night air. Close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. Close enough that his hoodie brushed lightly against my sleeve whenever the wind shifted. Close enough that breathing felt difficult. You know what your problem is? I asked softly, mostly because I needed to say something before my heart exploded. What? You say devastating things in the calmest possible voice. To my surprise, Griffin smiled slightly. Then, very gently. He reached up and fixed the edge of my scarf where it had twisted sideways in the wind. The movement was so small, so careful, but the second his fingers brushed near my neck, every thought in my brain vanished instantly. And judging by the way Griffin froze afterward, he felt it too. Neither of us moved after that. Griffin's hand stayed lightly against my scarf for maybe half a second too long before he pulled it back slowly, like he'd only just realized what he was doing. The air between us felt different now. Not subtle anymore. Not safely ambiguous. Real. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. If either of us moved even slightly closer, this stopped being hypothetical. My pulse was loud enough to be physically embarrassing. Griffin looked away first, exhaling slowly through his nose like he was trying to steady himself internally. Sorry, he murmured. For fixing my scarf. He stopped. Tried again. That. I stared at him. That was not helpful considering my entire nervous system had just detonated. You're apologizing a lot tonight, I said quietly. His jaw shifted slightly. Occupational hazard. That's not normal. It is for me. Something about that answer hurt more than it should have. The river moved dark and silver behind us, while wind carried cold air through the streetlights. Griffin shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets like physically stopping himself from reaching toward me again. Which, unfortunately, I noticed immediately. Dangerous. Hey, I said softly. His eyes lifted toward mine again. You don't have to apologize every time you exist near me. The words slipped out before I could filter them. For a second, Griffin just looked at me. Then something in his expression cracked slightly. Not open completely. Just enough. You make this difficult, he admitted quietly. My heart stumbled painfully. Pretty sure you started this when you wrapped me in a hoodie on public transportation. You were freezing. You keep saying that like it explains everything. Doesn't it? No, absolutely not. Because cold wasn't the reason my chest felt tight every time he looked at me now. We stood there another long moment before Griffin glanced toward the street. I should probably get you home before you miss another train intentionally. The worst part? He was right. Because somewhere during tonight, I'd stopped wanting the evening to end at all. Okay, I said quietly. Neither of us moved immediately. Again, which felt like its own answer. The train station was calmer than usual at that hour. Late-night commuters sat scattered across benches while announcements echoed softly through the platforms. Griffin walked beside me in comfortable silence, shoulders close enough to brush occasionally. Every tiny accidental contact felt catastrophic now. At one point our hands bumped lightly while walking down the stairs. Both of us reacted instantly. Not dramatically, just awareness. Griffin glanced sideways toward me briefly before looking away again. Yeah, he felt it too. That somehow made it worse. My train arrived with a metallic screech against the tracks. Neither of us spoke right away. Then Griffin looked at the open doors and quietly asked, You working tomorrow? I blinked. Yeah, evening shift. A small nod. Okay. I waited. Okay, what? His eyes flicked toward mine. I'll walk you home after. My heartbeat fully lost structural integrity. Oh, excellent. Incredible response. Griffin's mouth twitched slightly. You keep doing that. Doing what? Looking surprised when I want to see you again. The honesty in his voice hit so hard I almost forgot how breathing worked. I'm not surprised, I admitted softly. Then what? I looked at him standing there under harsh station lights. Hoodie sleeves pushed slightly up, tired eyes fixed quietly on mine. That careful warmth underneath every word. And told the truth. I think I'm trying not to get carried away. Something changed in Griffin's face immediately. Softer. More vulnerable. Like hearing that mattered to him. The train doors beeped beside us. Neither of us looked away. Then quietly, almost careful again. You should probably get on before I give you another reason not to. The sentence hit me like a physical thing. Because suddenly I wanted to know exactly what that reason would have been. Dangerous. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. I stepped backward toward the train slowly. Griffin watched me the entire time. And right before the doors started closing, I heard myself ask, would it really be so terrible if you did? For one suspended second, Griffin looked genuinely caught off guard. Then the train doors slid shut between us. I stood frozen inside the carriage while my heart tried to escape my body entirely. And Griffin, quiet, exhausted, devastating Griffin, looked at me through the glass with an expression I couldn't fully name. Not distant anymore. Not guarded. Just wanting. The train started moving. Neither of us looked away until the platform disappeared completely.